Okay, great.
Dave.
All right, we'll give it another minute or two and then we'll
Sure.
get started.
Sure. I'm in no rush. This is my last activity for the day today, so no problem. Nothing coming after that.
Okay. Good
You know,
afternoon.
it's evening time in Israel, so you're my last program for the day.
Oh my God, that's so bad. I would force you. Oh my God. I know that. And I didn't know what. That is the speed of it. I love it, I love it. I was really so. I tried to make it upstairs. And but I felt it didn't work. Oh my God, that's so sweet. You're so sweet. You're so sweet. Thank you. That's my soul day. Oh, it makes me so happy. That is. And I made it with magnet.
You're live, Lila, whenever you're ready.
I'm sorry, Ron, what'd you say?
I said we're live, everything, the live stream's going, so whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. I'm gonna give it. Going with that. I know, where did we see go? Oh.
I got so excited.
Hi, Judith. Hi, Anne. Okay, so we are going to, let's see, what time is it?
You know, what I put.
It's just 12, okay. Hello, how are you? Good. Okay. How is everybody?
Good, everyone. I got the senior chance. You said, how's everybody? And I said, no sense complaining. I got to see a good one yesterday. She was fabulous. Oh, yes.
Okay, so we're going to get started. Okay, everybody. Hello, hello, shalom, shalom. All right, we are in for a real treat over the next 4 weeks. We have the pleasure of having Rachel Korazim here joining us from Israel, who will be teaching us over the next 4 sessions. Perfect. And Rachel is a leader in the field of Jewish education in Israel, and she opens a window to Israeli society through literature, stories, poems, and songs of the best of Israel's writers. And she invites her listeners and learners to engage with Israel in an innovative way. And so over the next 4 weeks, we will be studying the poetry of Israel post-October 7th. And we have 4 really beautiful sessions. Each week you'll receive the material, you'll have it in front of you. And also, I think Rachel will also be sharing it on the screen for those of our friends who are online virtually as well. And we'll be looking at the poetry of Israel post-October 7th. Also, over the next few weeks, a session of this poetry in conversation with sacred text, and as well as the poetry and its connection to Pesach, as this course will take us into just a few weeks before Pesach. So without further ado, we welcome Rachel and welcome you to our temple family.
Thank you very, very much for having me, for committing for 4 sessions. I must tell you that beyond my regular classes that I have been teaching online since the beginning of COVID, and there we stopped counting the number of sessions that we had, because we are soon, in about 10 days, going to mark 5 years since we are meeting. But wow. all other frameworks and congregations occasionally since October 7th would ask me for 1 session, max 2. And you guys committed for 4 sessions. I'm impressed, I'm grateful, and I truly appreciate that. A few words of my own that are not said in general introductions. I have been teaching about Israel through poetry for many, many, many years. I do that at places such as I live in Israel, such as the Hebrew University, the Hartman Institute, the Pardes Institute, through visits to Jewish communities and welcoming groups from federations, from synagogues, etc., when they come to Israel. And then when COVID hit us almost 5 years ago, I, like many others, sort of literally moved into Zoom. And I started to do my sessions online. And I have developed an audience, Steve is one of them, of people who attend. During the height or the depth of COVID, we would meet 3-4 times a week. And then when life started going back to normal and other things reappeared in our life, we went a little bit less, but still. And you know, when you teach a university course, then you prepare a course, and then your students study it for a semester or a year, and then they go away and other students come, and you can use the same material, but not in my case. My students are not going anywhere, and they're staying, and I have to prepare new stuff, so I'm constantly preparing. And so I did in the summer and fall of 2023, getting ready to start my teaching as we start everything in the Jewish world after the high holidays. Little did I know, little did any of us know. When October 7th hit, I was not even in Israel. I was spending the period of the high holidays in Budapest. It's a long story. One day you may be interested in my connections to the Jewish community in Hungary, not today, but it takes me there often enough. And so I'm in Budapest, and the bewilderment and the shock and the not knowing if we're coming or going, and the constantly crying and the sleeplessness and not being able to get tickets to go back home because most companies stopped flying, and El Al took priority of people who are more needed in the country. 76 or 7-year-old social worker and teacher of poetry do not rate very high on emergency priority at times of war. And so I'm there on the first Shabbat after October 7th, and I cannot sleep. And it must have been 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning in Budapest, when, not knowing what to do with myself anymore, nothing seemed to work. And some of you may have shared this feeling, so you know what I'm talking about. I decided to go online to one of the many shuls in America that I am connected with, because 2 a.m. in the morning was Kabbalat Shabbat in America. And I went visiting with one of my rabbi friends, who was Rabbi Angela Buchdahl of the Central Synagogue of Manhattan. We are friends, and we have been for quite a few years. And, you know, she's the rabbi of a huge Reform congregation, and there is some beautiful stuff that I can say about Reform congregations, but knowledge of Hebrew is not one of them, as you may know. And yet my friend Angela, who must know that well better than I do, went on the bima that night, that first Shabbat after October 7th, and she started speaking in Hebrew, knowing well her community. And she used the words ein milim, no words. And then she continued, and I found myself a few minutes into her drash arguing in Budapest, like she's choking in New York, and I have tears running on my face in Budapest. And in my head, I am arguing with her, saying, Angela, you probably have no words. I for sure have no words, but there are people who do. They're called poets, and I will start looking for them, because that's my business. And this is the only way I can think of doing something. So the collection of poetry that later, in the following April, May, June of 24, when we started putting the collection together into an anthology, was actually, and this is a collection of Israeli poetry, in the wake of October 7th. It was actually born in Budapest because of a conversation with an American rabbi. So go figure how things happen. But this is how it was meant to be. Sometimes along the way, when I started collecting, translating, and teaching this poetry in one of the congregations, yet another Reform rabbi, Rabbi Jeff Salkin, says to me, Rachel, I know a publisher who might be interested. And then he got us together. It didn't work out with that publisher, but Michael Bonin, one of our translators, my friend in editing the book, found another one, and this is how the anthology Shiva that I'm going to refer to as the collection of poetry. I am still sending you the source sheets, but I will also mention the anthology. Some of you may be interested in purchasing and buying. As we say oftentimes, without further ado, let me put my PowerPoint presentation on the screen for us to look at and to guide us through what we are planning to do today. So, as you can see, we are in March and we are in Temple Beth El, and this is your Lunch and Learn meeting. And today we are going in our first session, all dedicated to poetry in the wake of October 7th in Israel. We are going to go under the smaller title, Shock and Bewilderment, namely looking at the poetry of the very first days. In our next session next week, I gave the titles, very, very general, so I could group under them things that would match our mood moving from one week to the other. So this one relates to the coming months after October 7th as days go by, or we could say now as days went by. Our third session will be a little bit more complex. Don't be scared. It doesn't demand any deep previous knowledge of either biblical texts or Talmudic ones, because I will present them and show them. But this is a collection of poems in the wake of October 7th that are in conversation with sacred text. So starting with Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, or the Mishnah, or the Gemara, or oftentimes prayer texts and such. And the last one, as advertised, our fourth session, will be In Every Generation, B'chol Dor V'Dor, which is a reference to Passover that will be very close to us, just like now we are very close to Purim. In a month, so we will be very close to Pesach. This is how the Jewish calendar works. I hope this is clear. Don't hesitate. If you have a question, raise your digital hand or your God-given hand in front of the camera, and I trust, Rabbi, that you can monitor that and stop me if need be, if somebody wants to make a comment, ask a question or anything. During the session, I have like pre-planned stops after one poem or two when I know that the audience that is encountering this poetry for the first time needs a moment to breathe. I will stop and invite your comments and questions, mainly so that we can breathe for a moment before we continue. So that is the deal. Also, if you are interested to know more stuff about me and my work, email me and I can prepare a minute or two in the coming sessions to share some of that with you. I don't mind sharing that kind of stuff, and here we go. So I have mentioned the anthology. You can see the cover page. It's called Shiva. I will address the name when we study one of the poems today. And you can see that there are three names on the cover page. Rachel Korazim being myself, Michael Bonin, whom I mentioned, from Boston, actually Newton, Massachusetts, who is a friend, a colleague, a translator, a supporter, unbelievable person, and Heather Silverman, the other friend, translator, who lives in the West Coast. So this is like a Jewish effort across oceans and continents and sometimes languages, and we do this together. The next thing I want to do is to pull up on the screen the poems that I am planning to address today. And actually there is one. No, I just switched the order, okay? We may, depending on you, if there will be more conversation, more reaction, that maybe we will do one less poem and invite more interactive participation. I don't know your group yet, so we will see how it works. The other thing I have done is putting the pictures of the poets on the screen. And I have a reason to that because it serves as my introduction to the topic. I have mentioned earlier that I have been doing this, teaching about Israel through its poetry for many years. I try to think of myself as I like to think of myself as a professional. So I know how to do literature classes and poetry classes. I know where to find your Yehuda Amichais and Altermans and Bialiks and Leah Goldbergs and Rachel, and I can continue name dropping of Israeli poets. And most of their books are on shelves, to my right-hand side and to my left-hand side here. And if not, I know where to find them in libraries or digitally. And I know where to find the reference articles and the learned PhDs that have been written about them and the critique, and they create my classes. This is my business. I know how to do that. But with the post-October 7th poetry that I'm collecting on the digital media daily, haven't stopped, even though we have the anthology already printed, is something totally different. How I wish back in the day that I could reach out and write an email or a message or any other contact to people like Leah Goldberg or Yehuda Amichai who are long gone and consult with them. It's impossible. I only have the written stuff or the recorded stuff. But these young people, they are all alive and active, and you can reach out to them and drop them a note on Facebook, and they will get back to you, and you'll have a conversation, and you can invite them into your classes. But there are no learned PhDs written about them yet. There will be, I know, but not yet. Many of them had not yet published in a book their poems, and I tell you something else. Many of them do not think of themselves as poets. They are lawyers and psychologists and musicians and journalists and social workers who also write poetry. So doing what we are going to start to do in about a minute is something that is a novelty for me as well. With all my many years of experience, I never had an experience like this. It's a new learning process for me. It's a new teaching process of which we all now share. Let me very quickly check and tell me there at the table, the head table, if you see a hand, if there is a question so far, if anything I have addressed so far needs clarification or a little bit more elaborate explanations, I could do that. But if there is nothing like that, then I would like to start looking at the poetry immediately.
Yep.
Okay.
We're good.
You are good. Okay, so if you look at the bottom right-hand side of your screen, you will see a picture of, to me, a very good-looking young man. Come on, young man. For some people, he is not a young man, but he's younger than my kids, all right? So for me, a young man. He's a father of 3 kids already. He's a lawyer, and his name is Michael Zatz. Of all the poets in the anthology, in the 4 sessions that we are going to have together, Michael is the only one I knew ahead of time. Like when I'm still in Budapest, under that shock of the first day, Michael, whose first poem I will find on his Facebook page, is a Facebook and a real friend of mine. I know him because I have taught some of his poetry in the past. Michael had come to Israel as a young immigrant, as a child immigrant from the former Soviet Union. And when he came of age and started writing, he had a lot to share about this experience, the immigrant experience, the child immigrant experience. So I invited him to a session that I had about the issue of immigration in Israeli poetry. So I'm calling Michael from Budapest, not yet knowing when and if I'll be able to go home. And we are commiserating, and then tears are shed, and these are the first days, and none of us understands how this could have happened to us. Where is it taking us? What will happen to us? And then in the middle of conversation on the phone, Michael is saying the following sentence. He says, but you know what, Rachel? Certain things remain unchanged. And now I'm waiting. Like the poet had said, certain things remain unchanged. I am waiting for a great insight. And then Michael continues and adds this next sentence, the dog needs to be walked. That was one of the things that remain unchanged. And if you think about it, how true is that? Because even a toddler, you can say, Dad is not in the mood for a walk today. But you cannot say that to your dog. You need to get up at 6 a.m. in the morning, as you always do, and walk the dog. And this is what Michael shared on the first poem that I have seen after October 7th. I don't remember if it was the 8th or if it was the 10th, but it's very early. Before we start reading it, just another matter of logistics. On the pages, normally on the left-hand side of the top, you will see a number. This is the page number from the anthology, Shiva. In case any of you had a copy of that and you wanted to look at the poems in the book, I will always give you the page number in the book. And it's very easy to get the book. You go on Amazon and you type Shiva, 7th of October poetry, and you'll get it. It's not very expensive, and all income is a donation to the Trauma Coalition in Israel. All poets, all translators, everybody did their work voluntarily, so everything goes to the Trauma Coalition, and we have been fortunate enough so far to send them over $30,000. So this is how it works. Let's look at the first poem. It's called Illusion in English. It is my custom, even though I trust most of you do not have Hebrew. I actually don't know that about you, but I'm assuming. To read the original Hebrew, then go to translation, and the discussion is always in English. אחיזת עיניים, מיכאל זץ. מדהים איך הכל נראה זהה גם כשכלום לא נשאר אותו דבר. Illusion. Amazing how everything looks unchanged even when nothing remained the same. If you are versed in what is called the haiku Japanese poetry, you will recognize that this is the style Michael is writing on. So no biblical reference here, but rather that concise form of the haiku poetry, which has one central metaphor, one idea, few words, and that's it. Let's go to the translation, and you can see on the top that I am one of the translators, and yet I have an issue with it. Illusion. Amazing how everything looks unchanged even when nothing remained the same. What's my issue? Indeed, when you look in any dictionary, digital or ChatGPT or the old-fashioned paper dictionaries that we have on our bookshelves at home, and you look at the Hebrew term achizat enaim, in English it will be illusion, and yet. What is that yet? First of all, the English is one word and the Hebrew is two, which is rare. Normally it's the reverse. The Hebrew is the more concise language. But the Hebrew words for illusion have actually a literal meaning that translates into illusion. And the literal meaning is holding of the eyes, achizat enaim, as if the person who is watching something that they know not to be the exact reality, they have the feeling that somebody is holding their eyes and making them see something while they suspect that something else is going on. Like a con artist, like a magician. They want you to see something, but if you are an adult, you know that it's not exactly what is happening. And this is what Michael is feeling that morning at 6 a.m. in the morning in Modi'in, his town, about halfway between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. To me, a very boring place, but don't tell that to people who live in Modi'in. It looks as if it was put together by Lego blocks or something, but it's a nice sort of suburbia to live in, good schools, good shopping malls, nice parks, and Michael lives there. But this poem can take us in a different direction altogether. That sense of changed, unchanged. Indeed, in post-October 7th Israel, if you were fortunate enough not to have lived in what we call the Gaza envelope or the northern kibbutzim, if your child was not in the military or abducted or killed, If you were not evacuated from your home, life in Tel Aviv or Haifa could look the same, while you knew perfectly well that it isn't. So why? How can it look the same? You know what it feels like? And I trust most of us sitting in this room, whether younger or older, have experienced that. When you lose somebody very close to you, a parent, a spouse, God forbid a child, and you go through what one needs to go through, the funeral and the shiva and whatever, and then comes the day when you have to get up and get out there. And lo and behold, there is a traffic jam on the street. People are sitting in coffee shops or rushing to the mall, and the sun rose, and your mom have died, or your beloved perished. And how can that be? And I think our gate into the situation in Israel of post-October 7th is exactly that. We are all in this post-Shiva mode when we are trying to recapture our lives, and it's not happening. Something basic had totally changed. I will allow you to address this if you will, but not before we read the next poem, okay? And I will invite a conversation about both. The next poem is slightly longer, and it has a longer title, and the title says, in English first, because I want to make sure that you understand it. The title says, Homefront Command New Regulations for Small Talk by Lital Kaplan, who is a psychologist. Michael is a lawyer. And I want to make 100% sure, before I take you into the poem, first in Hebrew, then in English, that you understand that the title is ironic, that the title is tongue-in-cheek, that nobody is actually telling us how to talk. So what does our poet do? I need to take you back to those early days, weeks after October 7th, when daily, and more than once daily, we had those people in uniform, most cases guys, who are from Homefront Command, which is the branch of the military that runs the life of civilians during wartime, and they are constantly giving us instructions, like what to do when the sirens sound. Are we allowed to gather? Are synagogues going to be allowed to have services? Are the schools going to be happen? If your house was hit, or the one next to it, if you know, etc., etc., etc. And I think that Lital Kaplan, our poet here, is sort of poetically addressing these people and said, oh guys, if you're so smart, let me know how to speak because I have lost my language. Hebrew first, הנחיות פיקוד העורף החדשות לשיחת חולין. מה נשמע בוטל? ובמקומו נשאל מה נשמט, מה נשבר, מה נשאר. מה קורה נאסר, ובמקומו נתהה מה קורס, מה נקבר. במקום מה שלומך החצוף נקדיר פנים מול חברנו ונשאל מה מלחמתך. ובמקום התשובה השגורה בשגרה עליה הוטל וטו חמור שבחמורים אצלי הכל בסדר, יש להשיב הכל בסדק, והמקפידים בדברי אמת יענו הכל בשבר, הכל בשבר. Homefront Command New Regulations for Small Talk by Lital Kaplan. What's up cancelled? Instead use what's shaken up, what's beaten up, what's blown up. What's going on banned? Alternatives? What's breaking down? What's forever gone? Instead of the rude, how are you? We must frown in the face of our friend and ask, how were you? And instead of the standard response forbidden by strict veto power, I'm fine in fact, it is required to say everything cracked. And the truthful ones will answer, everything is shattered, everything is shattered. Let me take you in a more in-depth reading of this poem, more detailed one, by knowing perfectly well that many of you have no Hebrew whatsoever, and yet I'm inviting you sort of metaphorically to hold my hand and come with me into the Hebrew. How do you say in Hebrew, what's up? Just listen to the words. I want you just to have the sound. This is not a Hebrew class. In Hebrew, you would say, manishma. And even if you have no Hebrew, the word Shema, you know. Because we are gathering in a synagogue, you must have heard the word Shema more than once. Hear, O Israel. So in Hebrew, when you ask somebody what's up, you literally are asking them, so what do you hear? What's the gossip? What are the sounds? It's all about sound. And our poet is taking that, the manishma, and she's breaking it down by changing one letter at a time, just like our reality comes tumbling down. Instead of manishma, say manishmat, dropped, manishbar, broken, manishar, left. And she does the same with what's going on, which in Hebrew is makore, and she changes it to makores, what's breaking down, manikbar, forever gone or buried. That will bring us to sort of the center of the poem. And there is a change of tone here by the fact that there is an adjective added. Instead of the rude, how are you? What needs to happen to a language for an expression, let's be honest, how are you? We use that at the beginning of any conversation, on the phone, on email, meeting somebody, at the beginning of a Zoom class, as you walked into the room today. And oftentimes we really don't expect the other person to tell us in detail how they are. And in most cases, we don't really care. It's just a polite figure of speech. What needs to happen to a language for that token of politeness to become rude? For that, I need to take you to the Hebrew again, the same way we did with the manishma. How do you say in Hebrew, how are you? The expression is, I'm going to turn to you, Roberta, because I see you on my screen. I cannot see all the screens, but I see some of them. I would say, mashlomech, Roberta. And in the mashlomech, you can hear the word shalom, which in Hebrew means peace. So actually in Hebrew, when I ask you how you are, I'm asking you, are you at peace? Is there peace with you? Is the biblical form, hashalom lecha, do you have peace? The other meaning of the same word, listen again, mashlomech, Rabbi, and you hear in it not only shalom, peace, you hear in it shalem, whole. I'm actually asking you, are you together today? Are you in one piece? Are you whole? Are you complete? Now think about post-October 7 Israel. Can you turn to anybody and safely assume that they are at peace? Can you assume about any of us in Israel that we are whole these days? No. So that basic token figure of speech of politeness had become rude. I want to take you a step further into that because it's important. It's a major change. We're not using that expression anymore, or we are not answering, literally, not only in the poetry. As I mentioned, I am a teacher of poetry, and one of the poets I love to teach is a person called Zelda. She died many, many years ago. She passed away in 84, which is like more than 40 years ago. And she was a Hasidic person, or ultra-Orthodox one could say, first cousin to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So actually we call her Zelda and not mentioning her last name, but her last name is pretty well known. It's Schneerson, like the Rebbe used to be. And Zelda has one of her many poems. By the way, there's a beautiful translation of Zelda's poetry into English by Marcia Falk that you may want to look up if you love poetry. Zelda has a poem, the title of which is Shlomi, which means my peace, my well-being. Now, this is, in Hebrew, it's not a stand-alone word normally. It's the beginning of a sentence. So I don't know your first name, the people at the head table whom I see where it says virtual Bet El, but the one with the long hair and the glasses on top of your head. What's your name?
Rashina.
Say again? Roshina.
Rashina, yes.
Okay, Roshina. So if I asked you, Roshina, ma shlomech, you would say, Shlomi, my well-being, and then you will continue. It's a beginning of a sentence. So we have to assume that the poem, the title of which is Shlomi, the poem is the continuation of that sentence. Zelda was married for about 20 years. She married late, and her husband Chaim, whom she loved dearly, was not a well man. But in those years that they had together, I can imagine these two elderly Orthodox couple sitting on the porch in front of their apartment, very modest, sipping tea in the afternoon, and Chaim turning to Zelda, maybe with a smile, and asking, Zelda, ma shlomech? I know about that because there is a poem about that. Or I can be a little bit more of chutzpah, impertinent, and imagine them early in the morning as they wake up in bed. And again, Chaim is smiling on Zelda early in the morning and asking, Zelda, ma shlomech? And now comes the poem as an answer. I'll quote in Hebrew, and they will translate to you for you immediately. She says, Shlomi kashur bechut leshlomcha. My well-being is tied by a thread to yours. How true is that about all of us? That we are normally as happy as the least happy of our children, as the least happy other significant person in our life. That particular sentence had appeared on a Jerusalem building on the first week after October 7th. And here is the building. It's a school for girls, an Orthodox school for girls. Obviously, Zelda's picture is not on the building. I put it on the PowerPoint for you. And it says, Shlomenu kashor bechut el shlomchem. Our peace, well-being is connected by a thread to yours. And they mean the hostages. And we still mean the hostages after 514 days. We still mean the hostages. I have adopted this sentence for myself. Since October 7th, when I am asked how I am, I say my well-being is connected by a thread to theirs. Yossi, my husband, who is a professor of social work, what can I tell you? The man is not that much into poetry, but the poor guy is married to me. So in one of those early days, he turns to me and says, Rachel, that Zelda thing is too complicated for me. Is there something simpler? And I said, yes, as a matter of fact, there is. There was this other poet, Chaim Guri, who enjoyed longevity. He died well after 90. And in one of the poems he wrote late in life, I will quote just the English for you. How are you? They ask me on the street, all kinds of people. I'm as well as my people, I answer them. If you meet the Korazims in the last 500 odd days and ask us how we are, I will tell you that my well-being is tied by a thread to theirs. And Yossi will tell you I'm as well as my people. And I assume that you can all understand that none of us is doing too well. So this is the moment when I normally stop for a brief stop and offer you the opportunity to react, to ask a question. It can be the people online or the people in the room. Just let me know if there is anybody who would like to address us. I'll give it a minute, and if not, I'll continue with the poetry reading. It's really your call. A question or a comment or an insight or anything to share.
We have a question here.
I
Go
have a
ahead,
question.
please.
So I know line breaks can be very important to the understanding beyond translation. Were in the poems that are appearing, in the Hebrew, were these the line breaks, the determinations of the poets themselves? And then in the translation, were those also honored, or was there conversation
Okay.
amongst you as
You
editors?
asked me a question for which I will need the whole hour to go into the process of what happens in translation. First of all, this particular one was not translated by Michael Heather and myself because the poet had preferred a friend of hers. Okay, and I'll go back to the poem in a minute before we continue to show you why she did that, and for a good reason. But normally translation is a hard, oftentimes painful, and if you are patient enough, in the two upcoming poems, I will show you examples where we really knew that we were paying a price in a particular choice, or we have decided not to do something and leave it to the reader. So are you willing to be patient?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there another question?
I don't see any at this time.
Okay, so let me take you back to the poetry. And we are going back to the same poem for me to conclude as we are leaving it. So as we continue, I'm putting the poem again on the screen, but this time I'm going to show you something that I find interesting. If you look at the verbs and adverbs chosen, what's up, canceled? What's going on, banned? Canceled and banned are from the language of law and order. Rude is from the language of education. Parents, teachers will use it. Veto power is from the language of politicians. And the truthful ones will answer, that's a halachic language. It's a rabbinic language. Hamakpidim b'divrei emet. So what our poet is saying, it's not only about home front command, new regulations. She's actually suggesting that every venue of our life has been touched. Every level of our language is going under some changes. And now to the question, if you look at the verse where it says, instead of the rude, how are you? You must frown in the face of our friend and ask, how were you? This jewel of translation happens very rarely. That the English, which is not the original language in which the poem was written, has a word that speaks to are you, were you. Actually, the English answers the Hebrew shalom, which is not that in the original language. So that's a real germ, and you don't want to lose it. And we agreed to leave the translation of Maya Valentine, who is a friend of our poet here, and not use ours. We have missed that moment totally. We haven't seen it in our work. So it was a give and take all along, and I'm taking you to the next one. As I'm doing that, two words of introduction. First of all, I wanted to use my slides to show you that a artistic expression as a reaction or in the wake of October 7th is not limited to the verbal. It's also in graphic arts. So I chose here one of our artists, actually an immigrant from the former Soviet Union, Zoya Cherkassky, whose work is in conversation with Picasso's Guernica and was already exhibited in New York last May, almost a year ago. So that's the first word of introduction. The other one is about what is happening in this particular poem. In this poem, there is a very serious criticism of God. And some people may find this problematic. Some people may consider this sacrilegious. So if you happen to feel that way, let me say the following. Calling God to task, arguing with God, is a solid, ancient Jewish tradition. Starting with our patriarch Abraham, who argues for the well-being of the people of Sodom, all the way through Job, through the poets, through the poets of the Middle Ages during the massacres, during the Crusaders, through the poets of the Holocaust and on. They have been the poets during pogroms like Bialik. Always, always argument with God. So our poet Asaf Gur is actually standing on very solid shoulders as he is expressing his pain by being angry at God. התגדל והתקדש שמי רבה ואף אחד לא בא. כמה אלפים קראו לו בשבת בבוקר וזעקו את שמו, התחננו בדמעות שרק יבוא, אבל הוא שבת מכל מלאכתו. שום אלוהים לא הגיע ושום אלוהים לא הרגיע, ורק השטן חגג בלי הפרעה, מפזז בין הקיבוצים למסיבת טבח, וכתבנו מוסיף ומדווח, ובין לבין גם מתייפח שיש תינוק שרוף ויש תינוק חטוף, ויש תינוק יתום ויש תינוק בן יום, מוטל מחובר בחבל הטבור לגופת אמו, ולא הספיק אפילו לגלות מה שמו. מה יירשם על המצבה הקטנטנה עם תאריך אחד ללידה ולפטירה? This is just part of the poem. There'll be another slide, but we are doing them one at a time. קדיש by Asaf Gur. התגדל והתקדש שמי רבה, and no one came. Many thousands called him on Shabbat morning, crying his name out loud, begging him with tears just to come. But he ceased from all his work. No God came, and no God calmed, and only Satan celebrated uninterrupted dancing between kibbutzim and the slaughter festival. And our correspondent goes on to report, all the while sobbing, saying there's a burnt baby, and there is an abducted baby, and there is an orphan baby, and there is a day-old baby still linked to his mother's body by the umbilical cord. He hadn't even managed to find out his name. What will be inscribed on the tiny headstone with a single date for birth and death? Let me take you back to the top. I know this is a toughie. All three of us, Michael, Heather, and myself, had agreed that the first line of the poem, which is the first line of the Kaddish, did not call for translation. That our audience, being 99.9 Jewish, did not need for the words of the Kaddish to be introduced to them. So we decided to only transliterate and not translate. Having done that, we had paid a poetic price, and let me show you. In Hebrew, יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, the glorious one, the illustrious one, ואף אחד לא בא, did not come. The Rabbah, glorious, is like, you know, a hammer on the word ba. Rabbah lo ba, Rabbah lo ba. And we let it go. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbah, and no one came. It as compared to the Hebrew, but it keeps the Kaddish intact. So you pay a price occasionally. And we could have gone a different way, and we didn't. Let's go into the poem. Many thousands called him on Shabbat morning, crying his name out loud, begging him with tears just to come, but he ceased from all his work. Aha, God, so that is the problem? You don't work on Shabbat? Next time you should call Hamas, tell them come on Monday, or what? Can you hear the bitter anger, irony? How dare you? But how much stronger for the Hebrew reader when the word Shabbat and the word seized in Hebrew is the same word. A reminder to us that we call the Sabbath Sabbath because in Hebrew it means seized. So for the Hebrew reader, he or she do not need a Rachel Korazim to see the irony of Shabbat, Shabbat, Shabbat. Okay. No God came and no God calmed, only Satan celebrated uninterrupted. With that, we are noticing here another very interesting phenomenon. You see the threefold repetition, no one, no God again. The threefold repetition is a classic Jewish ritual tool. Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Shema repeated 3 times, Kol Nidre repeated 3 times, and more and more. This is a classical Jewish ritual tool to establish presence. And what our poet is doing is the reverse. He's using the threefold repetition to establish absence. No one, no God count. And by that, he is linking himself to an age-old Jewish tradition. In times immemorial, where Jewish rabbis, philosophers, poets could not reconcile the coexistence of God and the tragedy that befell them, say Auschwitz, but in earlier phases as well, they come up with the notion that is called hester panim, the concealment of the face. There are times when God chooses not to be there, or not to see and not to hear. As soon as our poet Asaf Gur had established the absence of God with the threefold repetition, he can safely go to the next line. Only Satan celebrated uninterrupted dancing between kibbutzim and the slaughter festival. Isn't it God's role to interrupt Satan? But once he's not there, it's the realm of Satan. And from here we go into the satanic realm. And since God is no, 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 the poet will show us the is. If God is no, there is a burnt baby and an abducted baby and an orphaned baby and a day-old baby, etc. Bevakasha, God, if you are not there, this is what is there. It's either or. We cannot reconcile the coexistence of God and October 7th. It doesn't work. Look at what the poet goes on saying. And still, the baby is still linked to his mother's body by the umbilical cord, and he hadn't even managed to find out his name. I wonder how many of you are familiar with the fact that in Hebrew, when we speak about God, we oftentimes say Hashem, the name. So the word Hashem can mean the name and also God. And we wondered, as translating, should we capitalize the H in his name? Should we give the reader that option as well? And we have decided not to. We have decided not to because we didn't want to spoon feed with our reading. And we left it non-capitalized, his name, as if it's only the baby's name. But any Jewish reader who is familiar with the expression Hashem, the name, know that what the poet could have meant, the baby never had a chance to find out his name, the baby never had a chance to find out about God and about the divine. As we go to the next page, I want to start with the graphic again, and this will be also an explanation of the title, the name of our anthology. What you see on that black poster, which in Israel you have on t-shirts, on posters that we carry in demonstrations, is simply the words October 7th. But when you are asked in English, what is the date of those horrible things that happened to Israel? When did it happen? You will say October 7th, and you will be right. But in Hebrew, when we have to address the issue of the date, we say Hashiv'ah be'October. This is how you say October 7th in Hebrew. So every single time we address the date in Hebrew, we say Shiva, Shiva, Shiva. And this is why we decided to call our anthology Shiva, carrying the morning alongside the date. Let's conclude this poem. This is what the kibbutz looks like after Satan's visit, turning the broadcast back to the studio. Quiet now, they are shooting. They are also launching rockets. And there is no government, and there is no mercy. just the screaming and the pictures that will never leave the mind, the 7th of October, 2023. In Hebrew, it rhymes, but I want to take a minute here because I need to do a time check with you. Are we obliged to finish exactly after an hour, or can I go a little bit longer? It's your call.
You're okay? Everyone's okay? Yeah, we can go a little bit longer.
Okay, so I can do a couple of more points. Since we have stopped already for a minute here, let me check if there are any comments or questions at this moment before I continue. I'll try to read with you at least 2 more poems.
Okay, that's great.
Okay? Right.
Yes.
So let me take you back to the PowerPoint, and then we will leave a few minutes at the end again with an opportunity to check in with you. So you will see me skipping a few slides, but the poems are there, you know, you got them, and you can read them on your own as I continue to take you to the next poem, which is not this one, and not to this one, but this one. For this, I need again a couple of words of introduction. You can see the Hebrew here, and we will quickly switch to the English and do only the English for the sake of brevity. But I want to say a word of introduction here. This poem needs for us to pay attention to 2 things. The title is Ima Tamid Tzodeket, Mom is Always Right. And this poem is in conversation with what I call, it's not a formal term, it's a Rachel Korazim concussion. What I call the intergenerational Israeli lie. What do I call the intergenerational Israeli lie? The fact that when I was born to my Holocaust survivor parents in Israel 79 years ago, I was promised throughout my childhood that by the time I grow up, we will be done with all the wars and the military, etc. And I faithfully went ahead and educated my kids the same way. By the time you grow up, and my kids are both over 50 and they have children of their own. And I'm sure that would have wanted to tell them the same, that by the time they grow up, there will be no need for an army. And this is what the poem is dealing with and is in conversation with. The additional thing, and it is especially for people who are into more professional reading of poetry or even teaching, and that is the poetic narrator voice. In this particular case, Itai Lev is stepping off, and the voice we hear in the poem is the voice of a child. He is not using his adult voice. He is assuming a young boy's voice on that dreadful day of October 7th. Mom is Always Right by Itai Lev, who is a musician, a conductor of choirs, and a very sweet man. Mom said that when I grew up, there would be no army. Mom was right. I haven't yet grown up, and already there was no army. It wasn't there when I heard them screaming outside. It wasn't there when I saw Dad so scared and stressed. It wasn't there when the door was kicked in. It wasn't there when I hid under the bed. It wasn't there when we 3 pushed back on the door of the safe room. It wasn't there when time just stood still. It wasn't there when they suddenly entered. It wasn't there when they tore Dad off Mom. Mom had said that when I grew up, there would be no army. Mom was right. Now all I want is to tell her that she is always right. I cried, I screamed, and still she is silent. If you want like one poem to capture for you October 7th, take this one.
Wow.
And with that, I'd like to conclude with something that I'm very conscious of your need to breathe after this one. No matter how many times I have read it, I still am choking on it. I want to take you to a poem that is spread over 2 pages. And it's written by Tal Shavit, also a social worker. and it's called a good day. And a good day translates from the Hebrew Yom Tov. And indeed, Yom Tov means a good day. But there is an additional meaning, because we use the expression Yom Tov, a good day, when we address the holidays. We say Yamim Tovim when we mean our festivals. So I want you to keep these two meanings of the expression a good day, like it's really a festive day, and look at what Tel Shavit is suggesting for a festival after October 7th. It starts very, very frantic mood of those early days, and then when I'll switch to the second slide, you will experience a change of tone. A good day. I want to manage all the war rooms, mobilize all the supply chains. I want to take care of all the children and all the single mothers and those who are gone. I want to turn myself into protective vest for all the fighters, become iron domes over the heads of all the girls, each and every one, to sustain all the families, the evacuated, the broken, the crushed, return those who were taken, bring back all that is gone. I want to collect all the donations and take them where they belong, to pass all the messages, to make all the sandwiches, to oversee all the efforts. I hope you can feel how much of these things one would want to do, as we all wanted in the early days, like do something, is totally out of our control. We cannot become an iron dome. We cannot protect all the fighters, but we want to so much. And then, but on a good day, I manage sometimes to breathe, sometimes to drink, sometimes to call loved ones. On a good day, I manage sometimes to cry. People oftentimes talk about Israelis being in a post-traumatic phase. And after reading this poem, my suggestion is forget post-trauma. We are still within the trauma. We are still experiencing it as long as we still have 59 hostages in the hands of the Hamas, as long as people cannot go back to their homes, as long as the bereaved families had not found some sort of solace and ability to go back to semi-normal life, or the thousands of wounded, the emotionally wounded, we are still within the trauma. So, ladies and sir, this was more or less the first session, but I am in no rush. And if people would like to comment or would like to ask something, I'm here to listen, and if able, then to react to your comments. Bevakasha, please go ahead, either in the room or on the Zoom, whatever works. Yes, please, Robin. You have, yeah, and you saw the page numbers on every slide, so you could go there, Steve. Yeah, Robin, please go ahead.
Thank you. I guess two comments. One is that I very much appreciated your talking about translating from the Hebrew, because sometimes the Hebrew says it in a way the English just can't. And one of the things that makes me love Hebrew is just how it's constructed, and that how one word can mean different things, but they're all connected. So I really appreciated that. And the other thing I wanted to say is that it's just heart-wrenching. That's all.
And this is why I'm not surprised when people are not reacting and not asking questions, because I know that the first encounter with this is like exactly as you have said, Robin, heart-wrenching. Let me tell you sort of that I take you a little bit into a lighter mode, because I feel responsible for the state you are in right now. And that is that I sometimes jokingly say that you can say anything in my classes, but for two things. The first big no-no is you're not to call me Rachel, I'm Rachel. And the other is when you refer to the poems, you are not allowed to say the Hebrew version. The Hebrew is the poem. The English is the version. Okay? So thank you for your comment, Robin, because I feel it's very important to read the Hebrew, even if only a few understand it, even if you understand like bits and pieces. But if I can show you the Shema, if I can show you Shalom, if I can show you Rabbah Lo Ba, we have done something. Okay, so thank you. Anybody else, dear friends?
I want to just be clear that it's not that there are no reactions. It's hard because you're not in this space, but there is so many reactions here.
I know that, but it's hard to speak. I know.
Right. I think that that's just a true testament to the power, to the beauty, to the richness, and to the authenticity of this expression. And so grateful to you for just, I mean, this is just the first session. I like can't wait till next Tuesday. So I want to just, with such gratitude, thank you for bringing us and inviting us into this sacred space, and for introducing us to these amazing poets. And wow, yeah, I think it's a big wow moment in here.
Okay, I'd like to add one thing that's logistical. This is beyond Steve. I don't know any of you from before. And some of you may be doing some teaching either professionally or voluntarily. If you can make use of the PowerPoint presentations for any other circle in your life, I can send them to you. I do not hold this as a private possession. I developed those tools because I'm a teacher and I know that other teachers may want to use them. So if that is of use to you, Rabbi, I will send you after each session a PowerPoint presentation, and you are even allowed to post it next to the recording.
Okay, great.
So people to download, and I'm not afraid of that, and people are more than welcome to use it. Okay.
Wonderful.
Rabbi?
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Anita, yeah, you wanted
Rabbi
to.
and Rachel, I don't see any, I have a Monday class where it's supposed to be conversational Hebrew, but we're learning Hebrew. We're not very advanced. Thank you so much. And I hope that we'll be able to repeat your class with my class. I think that they would appreciate it so much. There were only a few of us. I was speechless before. I came in late into the class, and the tears started coming as soon as you started to read. So thank you for this. It's very difficult.
I know. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for your honesty. More of that. Steve, you unmuted yourself? Yeah.
Yes. I would just like to say that there is a regular class on Wednesday that I've been taking for close to 5 years. And it's a wonderful class. People
So,
should
Steve,
find out about it.
What you can do for the Chevra or the rabbis can do, put my email in the chat for people to copy, and anybody who would like more information on that can email me. I'll put you on my mailing list, and then you can decide. Also, my website, which is just my last name, as you can see it on the screen or in your program, korazim.com, has, I'm not exaggerating, close to 1,000 recorded lectures by now from the beginning of COVID. And about three quarters of them, 75%, are in English. Only about 25% are in Hebrew. So you are more than welcome. It's a free site, and you can take advantage of that. If you get a copy of Shiva, of the anthology, on Amazon, and you go to my website, korazim.com, you will see that there is a recorded commentary on every single one of the poems in the anthology in English.
Gosh, amazing.
The shortest of which is 4 minutes and the longest is 13 minutes on each and every poem. So use it freely in your circles, in your other classes, if you belong to other shuls, whatever works. It's not mine. These poems were given voluntarily by the poets and they know that they will be spreading throughout the Jewish world through my classes, and you are welcome to do that. They have given us permission, all of them, unless you publish them and make money out of it, but I don't think any of you will do that. Okay, thank you. Have a wonderful rest of the day. In Israel is already after 8 p.m., so a little bit of a late dinner for me tonight, and until we meet again.
We'll see you next week, live as well.